Today I'm going to talk about arranging for virtual libraries, strings that are somewhat real. We want to make them sound real, but they are inside a little box, inside a hard drive. And specifically, I'm going to talk about what today people in the industry are calling neoclassical. Neoclassical is pretty much a chamber sound, kind of like classical music, not the biggest symphonic string ensemble, but the small one, or chamber. I usually start with a piano sketch because it's really hard for me to play the virtual library without getting latency. So, if I go like this and it's just a second later, a couple of milliseconds later, I get the sound. So I usually start with a piano sketch. It's a lot easier. The ostinato that I came up with is really simple. One of the strings that I tried to do this with was this wonderful arc or Metropolis arc from Orchestral Tools. Orchestral Tools, they sound amazing, big sound, very realistic. The ambience or the room sound is beautiful. So I transfer or copied the piano sketch to this MIDI channel here that is going to be played by Metropolis Arc. So we're going to hear that for a second. I set it up to play octaves. So you hear spiccato, this one here, it says O as in octave. So you hear both the bass or the basses and the cellos. So it saves me time because I don't have to put the notes in a MIDI channel that has a cello and then another MIDI channel that has the bass. Both of them are there. It's easier. And I doubled it up here. Same library, Orchestral Tools, and I'm playing the high strings. So these are the violas and the violins. So if I play one note, I can hear two octaves, which also saves time. So I'm going to play only the high strings. And if I play the low strings, it's going to sound like this. Now, it sounds great, sounds massive. It's, I think, rather easy to copy from the piano sketch, onto the channel, the bass or the low strings, which are played in octaves, basses and cello, and then up here, violas and violins are together, so it's kind of easy to just copy, paste, and the job is done. But one thing that I noticed with these large strings is that it kind of gets muddy and blurry when especially the low notes are playing so fast. It loses definition. Not so much in the high strings. And I'm not adding any reverb. It has no reverb at all. It's just the natural room sound or studio sound. But I want a library that has more definition in terms of playing fast notes that I can hear, that it sounds crisper. Okay, so I'm gonna mute these notes. I transferred or copied and pasted the piano sketch. And I used the same notes with Cinematic Studio Strings. Oh, that sounds a little bit crisper. Yet I want it to sound a little bit smaller and a little bit crisper, like a smaller ensemble and hear the individual notes. And I know these strings are playing really fast. These are 30-second notes. So I came up with a different approach. So here I started using fluid strings by Performance Samples. They are great strings. They sound a little bit smaller, more like chamber music. I believe they recorded fewer strings for each section. So instead of doubling in one channel only, I put them separately, cello, viola, and violin, not the bass. So I'm going to play the cello first. I put it in audio. I transferred it to audio because I had too many things happening at the same time. But here's the cello only. And here is with the viola. I like that better because it doesn't sound as big. There's room for more notes. So we have 30-second notes and they sound a little bit crisper. I'm going to add the violin now. And this violin, I'm panning a little bit to the left, the viola a little bit to the right, and the cello a little kind of in the middle. I don't know why. Usually goes to the left, to the right. One thing that I wanted to do was not have the exact same repetition in all these strings. So for the basses, even though I'm not using only the basses, I'm using this large ensemble, kind of treated it as what the bass would do, playing only quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. In classical music, if we're trying to make it sound like neoclassical or classical music, the ensemble is playing what is possible, or musicians are playing what is possible. Violins usually play the fastest notes. Violas can do the same thing. Cellos can play fast, but not as fast as violins and violas. And basses will never play 30-second notes. So they're not going to be playing but rather the accents. So I'm treating this as the basses, even though it's a full ensemble. So we're going to hear it without the bass. And then I'm going to add the accent on the 1, 2, 3, 4 or quarter notes. And here's with the accent. Especially down here, this is the dominant, where all these high notes or high strings are playing. The bass would never be able to play that, even though this is a virtual instrument. Also, it makes sense that the low notes don't play that many notes because it gets blurry, as I noticed before with the Metropolis Arc. So let's compare Performance Samples playing a small ensemble like chamber music. And we're going to compare those to Cinematic Studio Strings. So here are Cinematic Studio Strings. Metropolis arc. It's a little bit bassier. And now performance samples playing all these notes, but in a more separate way. I think that sounds more like classical music, and this sounds more like film music. Metropolis strings. Much bigger, gets a little blurry down there, the low notes. Obviously, cinematic studio strings are supposed to sound cinematic and not like chamber music or classical music. I think I like this approach better for what's called neoclassical music, pretty much chamber music. All right, especially the accents down here. Without those accents, I kind of lose a little bit of something. You know, it sounds a little bit too even. Like all the notes are playing the same thing. All the strings are playing the same notes. So that would normally be okay. And that sounds pretty realistic. In essence, this is the main course, the main dish. This is the actual meal. These strings that I just played. Now I'm going to add extra sauce to it. I am really happy with these strings, this library called Westwood, and this particular library is called Strings Untamed. It's kind of dirty on purpose. I was looking for something that sounded imperfect, that sounded dirty, that sounded like something was off. Because with a real ensemble, you don't get a perfect MIDI performance. You get noises, you get some notes that are a little bit out of tune. So when I found this library, I purchased it and I used it in several of my compositions, and I was really happy with the end result. So I'm going to show you the same ostinato, but now played with this solo library called Untamed. And I'm making sure that the accents are really pronounced. So the downbeats, the velocity is much harder. It's at, I guess, 127, and the other ones are at 86. Look at this. So you get the accents on the downbeats. Otherwise, it sounds like a machine gun. All the notes sound the same. So the machine gun effect is this. Or this. All notes sounding kind of like the same, but a real musician would play with accent the downbeats much more, and I like how aggressive it gets. So anyway, I did the same thing with the viola, also untamed. So here is without untamed. And here's with untamed strings. Although I am not a fan of these sounds or this library, I still added them to add volume and to have solo strings that make the sound less perfect and less even. So here is Audio Imperia solo. Now, to me, that sounds full, that sounds believable, realistic. I'm happy with the sound. However, I always want more. I always want more details and more things, more things happening. And one thing that I really like in classical music is when you have ostinatos or something that is repeating and there are notes, there are instruments that coming in and out unexpectedly. It's something that adds sauce to the main dish here. So syncopation is beautiful. Extra melodies here and there that break the monotony is something that sounds really life, like something is happening in front of you, not the same thing over and over, especially when you have ostinatos. So I'm going to add syncopation, things, whatever comes to mind. And usually what I do, because I cannot play that fast, I start singing it. So if I'm playing my sketch, for instance, I start humming, I start whistling, I start singing things here and there. So my process is like this. I start playing the sketch. Bing. Something, I don't know. Whatever comes to mind. I start recording a couple of ideas without wanting to make anything sound perfect. I just go for whatever comes to mind. I record with my voice, I whistle, I clap, let my dog bark, whatever. and then I record several ideas, and then once I'm happy with one of them, I put them in a piano sketch and then listen to it, and eventually I transfer that to a string instrument. So here's that ostinato. And then here's one of my ideas with a second piano. Let's do something. We're going to hear that piano. We're going to leave it there because I kind of like that instrument on top of the strings. And I'm going to add solo violin. Here's Joshua Bell's library, okay? And then another untamed, violin untamed. So remember, I wasn't adding the ostinato to the violin untamed, just to the viola and the cello, but now I have the higher string playing these interesting syncopations. Pagadadam, pagadadam. Now I have two things happening simultaneously. The low notes, or the ostinato. Actually, it's not the low notes because all the strings are playing, but it's the ostinato. The piano is a lot easier to understand. Where is my piano? So here. Constant. And then I have the higher notes. Playing something different. And that to me sounds really cool. Now we're going to hear all of them at the same time. Yes. there's more. Let's add more stuff. I need sustained notes, sustained violins. What do I have for the strings? For the sustained strings? Untamed violin or untamed strings. Why? I was looking again for something that sounded dirty, imperfect, weird. Something that sounded like people are scratching those bows and making loud noises. And this was the answer to it. Sounds imperfect. Sounds like there's noise. That sounds like some things are out of tune and you can hear the bows, the scratch, and just a little bit of aggression, which I need in my life. And here's with a viola. So now violin and viola, both untamed. So to wrap it up, I started with something like this, the sketch. Eventually, I ended up with this.